Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked the country's President Isaac Herzog for a pardon over the corruption cases against him. Netanyahu's been standing trial for the past 5 years on charges of bribery, fraud, and a breach of trust in connection with 3 separate cases. He has denied any wrongdoing. President Trump's been lobbying hard on his behalf. Earlier this month, he sent a letter to Israel's president, formally urging him to fully pardon Netanyahu. That was a follow-up to this appeal, which President Trump made directly to Israel's Knesset a month and a half ago.
I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? Give him a pardon. By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. You know, whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about that?
Well, the Israeli president's office said Herzog would receive opinions from justice officials before considering the request, which carries with it significant implications. Anshel Pfeffer is a biographer of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli writer for The Economist. Good afternoon to you, Anshel.
Good afternoon.
Just explain, first of all, what this corruption case, more than one case, against Benjamin Netanyahu, is that just about cigars and champagne, as President Trump suggested?
Well, there are 3 cases in which Netanyahu is charged with the fraud, breach of trust in a public office, and bribery. And yes, one of those cases does include him receiving massive amounts, allegedly, of gifts from wealthy benefactors, which include also crates of French champagne and boxes of Cuban cigars, amongst other things. And the more serious cases there are of allegations of dark dealings between Netanyahu and press barons, in which he tried to get them to change to cover him more favorably in return for various regulatory favors that he arranged for them, allegedly, of course. Now, this is being called a request for a pardon, but Netanyahu isn't doing anything here that people who request for pardons do. He's not admitting to anything that he's being charged of. In fact, he's insisting that if the case does continue to its end, he will be totally exonerated, and he's not resigning from his role as prime minister in any way. So it's not really, even though it's being called a request for a pardon, it's actually Netanyahu almost demanding for his case to be dismissed.
So, we've had this statement out, which just says Herzog is going to get opinions from justice officials before considering this request. What is the likelihood of the Israeli president actually issuing a pardon to Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it will be difficult, I think, for Herzog from public perspective to issue this pardon in this case, in these circumstances, with Netanyahu not admitting to any kind of culpability and not resigning. On the other hand, Herzog has been quite weak in recent years in front of this onslaught of Netanyahu's far-right coalition on the courts and on the legal system. So it may well be that Herzog will grant Netanyahu his wish, or we may see some sort of period now of negotiations between the president's office and the prime minister's office of what the terms of such a pardon may be. Herzog has in the past said that he thinks that Netanyahu's case should end in a plea bargain, but a plea bargain is a bargain in which whoever's in the dock has to accept some of the charges and a reduced sentence in return for ending the case. So I think all the options are still on the table, but Netanyahu has basically said to Herzog, I don't think I should be in trial. I'm doing much more important things. And also, by the way, Donald Trump is behind me. And we'll have to see if President Herzog can find a spine and withstand this basically demand from Netanyahu that his case be dismissed.
If he were to do so, it would be pretty controversial. As you've pointed out, you've got the opposition parties there in Israel saying that Netanyahu should admit his guilt, which he's shown no signs of doing. And I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu has lost the support, hasn't he, of quite a few voters there in Israel over the way that he has prosecuted the war in Gaza.
Well, the polls have been showing now, almost all the reliable polls have been showing now for over 2 years that were elections to be held, Netanyahu would lose them. And there is an election that's going to be held by the end of 26, at least that's what's scheduled. So Netanyahu is trying now very hard to reach that election, not as an indicted person on trial. And this is his attempt to try and shed the trial off from him, and we'll see if it succeeds. He's certainly putting a lot of pressure on the president, and he has help, as we've seen in recent weeks, from the president of the United States in this.
There's been a lot of suspicions, hasn't there, that Benjamin Netanyahu did not really want the war in Gaza to end, because once it did, then these cases could come to a head, and he could potentially, if found guilty, find himself in jail. I mean, where do you think we are now with that process?
Well, we have this case which has been going on for 5 years, and it has proceeded also during the war. So the war wasn't Netanyahu's get out of jail card. We've, as you've mentioned, we've got Netanyahu's situation in the polls, which is quite dire. We've got an election coming. We've got a number of, we've got various pressures being brought upon him within his own coalition. Whether it's the circumstances in which the war has ended, though the ceasefire is very fragile, whether it's legislation that the religious parties in his coalition are demanding, all these things are very unpopular right now. And basically what we're seeing is Netanyahu trying to push in all directions, saying, I'm so essential, and there's so many incredible things I'm going to achieve now together with Donald Trump, and I'm going to change the Middle East. So how dare you hold me to account for anything, for the war that went wrong, for this corruption case? It's basically a bid for immunity from all kinds of public scrutiny and prosecution. So that's the way these sort of semi-autocratic minded leaders conduct themselves, as if no one really can hold them to account, and it is certainly a test to the Israeli system.
And what is happening on? I mean, you mentioned there the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. We were supposed to be moving to this phase, weren't we, where there would be an interim force to keep the peace in Gaza, a stabilization force to ensure that Hamas was not allowed to return to controlling, which it has been, of course, throughout. And while there was the establishment of this board of peace, I mean, since the very high-profile signing of the peace deal with President Trump, of course, there and so on, we haven't heard very much about where that's going, and really little sign of the process continuing.
So, as you say, we're 7 weeks from when the ceasefire began, and the first phase of the ceasefire has been carried out. Israel's released over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. Hamas released the hostages. All but 2 of the bodies have been returned. So the first phase has basically been carried out. Israeli troops have withdrawn from roughly half of the territory of Gaza. But the second phase, a new technocratic government in Gaza, the disarming of Hamas, and the deployment of some international stabilization force in Gaza, that so far has gone nowhere. We don't know yet who will be members of this technocratic government. We don't know which countries will be contributing troops to the stabilization force. We don't know what kind of a rearming process we can look forward to. And until these things happen, any serious reconstruction of Gaza, which has been devastated by Israel in this war, and there are 2 million people there who urgently need this reconstruction so they can have homes and they can have functioning hospitals and schools and everything else. That just isn't going anywhere right now. So it's stuck. It's hard to say when and if things will go forward.
Anshel Pfeffer, Israeli writer for The Economist, also biographer of Benjamin Netanyahu. Really good to get your insight. Thank you so much for joining us.